The moment Daniel Ross surrendered his emergency room spot to a blood-soaked stranger, every nurse in Chicago Memorial Hospital held their breath. His 6-year-old daughter wheezed desperately in his arms, fighting for air through another violent asthma attack, yet he'd given away their only chance at immediate care. But when Dr. Harrison emerged minutes later, face drained of color, and whispered the woman's name, Olivia Jennings, the entire waiting room erupted in gasps. Stay with me until the end of this incredible story and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale of compassion has traveled. The fluorescent lights of Chicago Memorial Hospital's emergency room buzzed with an almost malevolent intensity, casting harsh shadows across the packed waiting area that had become Daniel Ross's personal purgatory for the past 3 hours. Every plastic chair bore witness to human suffering. A mother cradling her feverish infant, an elderly man clutching his chest with trembling hands, a teenager pressing a blood-soaked towel against his forehead. The air hung thick with antiseptic and desperation, punctuated by the occasional wail of sirens announcing another soul joining their vigil. Daniel shifted his weight on the uncomfortable seat, his muscular frame aching from 12 hours of laying concrete at the Millennium Park renovation site. His calloused hands, still bearing traces of cement dust despite his hurried washing, gently stroked his daughter's sweat-dampened hair. Maddie's small body trembled against his chest, each labored breath a reminder of why they were here, why they'd been here since 9 o'clock, watching the digital clock above the admissions desk mock them with its relentless progression. "Daddy?" Maddie whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient chaos. "It hurts to breathe." The words sliced through Daniel's heart with surgical precision. He adjusted her position, trying to help her sit more upright, knowing from too many nights like this that the angle sometimes helped open her airways just a fraction more. "I know, baby girl. Just a little longer. The nice doctors will help us soon." His eyes darted to the admissions board for the 100th time. They were number 47 when they'd arrived. Now, after what felt like an eternity, they were number 3. Just 2 more people ahead of them. 2 more medical emergencies standing between his daughter and the nebulizer treatment that would ease the iron grip squeezing her lungs. Daniel's phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it, knowing it would be his foreman wondering if he'd make tomorrow's early shift. The answer was probably no, but that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight's problem sat wheezing in his arms, her favorite stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, clutched desperately in her tiny hands. "Remember what Mommy used to say?" Daniel murmured, rocking her gently. "When things get scary, we count our breaths. 1, 2, 3. Maddie tried to follow along, but her counting dissolved into a coughing fit that drew concerned glances from nearby patients. A woman in designer clothes actually scooted her chair further away, as if asthma might be contagious. Daniel bit back his anger. He'd learned long ago that rage was a luxury single fathers couldn't afford, especially not in emergency rooms where making a scene could mean getting escorted out by security. The automatic doors hissed open, bringing a gust of October wind that carried the scent of rain and exhaust fumes. Daniel barely glanced up anymore. He'd watched dozens of people come and go, some walking out on their own power, others wheeled away to unknown fates. But something about this arrival made him look. She stumbled through the entrance like she was navigating a ship's deck in a storm. Young, maybe mid-20s, with designer clothes that were thoroughly soaked and clinging to her thin frame. Her platinum blonde hair, probably perfectly styled hours ago, now hung in wet strings around a face that bore the unmistakable pallor of someone fighting to stay conscious. She made it 3 steps before her knees buckled. The crack of her body hitting the linoleum echoed through the waiting room. Several people gasped. A few stood up, but nobody moved to help. "Probably drunk," someone muttered. "Or high," another voice added with disgusted certainty. "Look at her! Rich kid who partied too hard." Daniel watched as the woman tried to push herself up, her arms shaking with the effort. A dark stain spread across the front of her white blouse. Blood, he realized with a start. She was coughing blood. "Daddy?" Maddie tugged at his sleeve, her breathing momentarily forgotten in her concern. "She's sick. Really sick." The woman managed to get to her hands and knees, crawling toward the admissions desk with a determination that reminded Daniel of soldiers he'd seen in war documentaries, wounded but refusing to give up. The night clerk, a heavy-set man named Gary, who Daniel had watched dismiss dozens of cases as non-urgent, barely looked up from his computer screen. "Take a number," Gary droned. "Current wait time is approximately 4 hours." The woman's response was to vomit blood onto the floor. Even Gary couldn't ignore that. He hit a button, calling for a nurse, but his expression suggested this was more inconvenience than emergency. "Someone will be with you shortly," he said, returning to his screen. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a tightening that had nothing to do with the recycled air or the smell of disinfectant. He watched the woman collapse again, this time onto her side, her body curled into a fetal position. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. Prayer, maybe, or calling for someone who wasn't there. The memory hit him without warning, as it always did, sudden and brutal as a car crash. Sarah, his wife, 3 years ago. Different hospital, same indifference. She'd been complaining of chest pains for weeks, but their insurance had lapsed when Daniel got laid off from the factory. The free clinic had a 2-month wait. The ER had looked at their financial situation and prescribed aspirin, suggesting she was having anxiety attacks about money. "Very common," the doctor had said with a patronizing smile. "Try meditation." 2 nights later, Daniel had woken to find her cold beside him, her heart having given out while their daughter slept between them, blissfully unaware that her world had just shattered. "Number 3! The electronic board flashed their number in green LED glory. "Ross, party of 2, please proceed to triage." Daniel stood, lifting Maddie with practiced ease despite his exhaustion. This was it. Finally. 3 hours of waiting, of watching his daughter struggle for each breath, and they were finally going to get help. He took 1 step toward the triage door. The woman on the floor coughed again, a wet, horrible sound that spoke of things breaking inside. Blood pooled beneath her cheek where it pressed against the floor. Daniel stopped. "Daddy?" Maddie's voice was confused. "It's our turn." He looked down at his daughter, at her trust-filled eyes beneath the superhero Band-Aid he'd placed on her forehead after she'd bumped it at school. Then he looked at the woman on the floor, alone and dying while people stepped around her like she was debris. "Mr. Ross?" A nurse had appeared at the triage door, clipboard in hand. "We're ready for you." The smart thing, the logical thing, was to take care of his daughter first. That's what any parent would do. Should do. His responsibility was to Maddie, not to some stranger who might be dying from an overdose or alcohol poisoning or any number of self-inflicted disasters. The world was full of people who made bad choices. He couldn't save them all. But he could save one. "Give her my spot," Daniel heard himself say. The nurse blinked. "I'm sorry." Daniel shifted Maddie to one arm and pointed with his free hand. "That woman. She needs help more than we do. Give her our spot." The waiting room, which had maintained its steady hum of misery, suddenly went quiet. Even the vending machine seemed to pause its humming to process what had just happened. "Sir," the nurse began, her voice taking on that careful tone medical professionals used with people they thought might be unstable. "Your daughter needs treatment. You've been waiting." "She has asthma," Daniel interrupted. "It's bad, but I've got her emergency inhaler in the car. Forgot it in the rush to get here. That woman is coughing blood. She needs you more." It wasn't entirely true about the inhaler. It was empty. Had been for a week since their insurance company decided the generic version they'd been getting wasn't covered anymore, and the name brand cost $300. But the lie came easily, wrapped in a truth he couldn't quite articulate. Some things mattered more than following the rules. The nurse hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and basic human decency. Gary, the desk clerk, had stood up, probably ready to call security if this turned into an incident. "Please," Daniel said quietly, "my wife died because no one thought she was sick enough to matter. Don't let that happen to someone else." Something in his voice must have reached her because the nurse nodded sharply and rushed to the woman on the floor. "I need a gurney here, now!" The response was immediate. Medical staff appeared as if from nowhere, surrounding the fallen woman with practiced efficiency. Daniel heard fragments of medical terminology: possible internal bleeding, respiratory distress, get her to trauma 2, as they lifted her onto a stretcher. As they wheeled her past, her eyes fluttered open for just a moment. They were green, Daniel noticed, the color of lake water in summer. She looked directly at him, and he saw something there. Not just pain or fear, but a loneliness so profound it took his breath away. Then she was gone, disappeared behind the emergency doors that swallowed the critical cases. "That was really stupid," a man in a business suit commented from his seat. "Now you'll be waiting another 2 hours at least." "She's probably just some junkie anyway," his companion added. "Waste of your time." Daniel didn't respond. He simply sat back down, settling Maddie more comfortably against his chest. She'd been quiet through the whole exchange, but now she looked up at him with those eyes that were so much like her mother's, it sometimes stopped his heart. "Why did you do that, Daddy?" We were next. How did you explain moral choices to a 6-year-old? How did you tell her that sometimes being human meant making decisions that didn't make sense on paper, but felt right in your bones? You remember the story about the Good Samaritan we read in your picture Bible? Maddie nodded solemnly. Well, sometimes we get to be the Good Samaritan. It doesn't always happen at convenient times, and it doesn't always make sense, but when someone needs help and we can give it, we should. Even if we need help too. Especially then, baby girl. That's when it counts the most. She seemed to consider this, then nestled back against his chest. Mommy would have done the same thing. Daniel kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo mixed with the staleness of the hospital air. Yeah, she would have. They settled in to wait again. The board showed them at number 64 now, back at the bottom of the queue. Around them, the ER resumed its normal rhythm. Crying children, worried parents, the occasional drunk person demanding to be seen immediately. But something had shifted in the atmosphere, subtle as a change in air pressure before a storm. 20 minutes passed. 30. Maddie's breathing grew more labored, each inhale a conscious effort. Daniel was just about to swallow his pride and beg the desk clerk for any kind of help when the emergency doors burst open. A doctor emerged, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. His surgical scrubs were spotted with blood, and his face bore an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. Shock? Anger? Fear? Who gave up their spot? The doctor demanded, his voice carrying across the entire waiting room. Who let that woman go ahead of them? The waiting room collectively held its breath. In Daniel's experience, when doctors came out looking for someone like this, it was never good news. Either you were about to be blamed for something or asked to make impossible decisions about someone's care. Gary, the desk clerk, pointed directly at Daniel without hesitation, apparently happy to deflect any potential blame. The doctor strode over, his surgical shoes squeaking against the floor with each step. Up close, Daniel could see the name embroidered on his coat, Dr. Marcus Harrison, Chief of Emergency Medicine. You're the one? Dr. Harrison's voice was strained, like he was holding back something explosive. Daniel straightened, ready to defend his decision if necessary. Yes, sir. Is she okay? Dr. Harrison ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture that seemed to age him 10 years. Do you have any idea who that woman is? Someone who needed help, Daniel replied simply. That's... Dr. Harrison paused, seeming to struggle with his words. That's Olivia Jennings. The name hung in the air like a physical presence. Around them, Daniel heard gasps, whispers, the scrape of chairs as people leaned forward to hear better. Even Daniel, who paid little attention to Chicago's social scene, knew that name. Olivia Jennings, heir to the Jennings Medical Group fortune, CEO of one of the largest healthcare companies in the Midwest, philanthropist whose name graced 2 wings of this very hospital. Her face had been on magazine covers. Her charitable donations made headlines. Her business acumen was studied in universities. The Olivia Jennings, someone whispered. The billionaire. The one who donated $50 million to the Children's Hospital? Daniel felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. He'd given up his sick daughter's spot in the ER for one of the richest women in America. The irony wasn't lost on him. A woman who could have bought the entire hospital was dying on the waiting room floor, while he, who couldn't afford his daughter's asthma medication, had been the only one to help. Doctor. Harrison seemed to be choosing his words carefully. She's stable. Severe allergic reaction complicated by a respiratory infection, if she'd waited much longer. He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Why was she alone? Daniel asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. Someone like her, shouldn't she have people, security, someone to call her private physician? Dr. Harrison's expression softened slightly. That's what we're trying to figure out. She had no identification, no phone, nothing. If we hadn't run her fingerprints for the transplant registry, we might never have known who she was. The absurdity of the situation, that they had to fingerprint one of the city's most prominent citizens like a common criminal, wasn't lost on Daniel. But before he could respond, Maddie started coughing again, harder this time, her small body convulsing with the effort. Dr. Harrison's attention immediately shifted to the child. His trained eyes took in her color, her breathing pattern, the way she held herself. How long has she been like this? Since about 6 this evening. We've been here since 9. Chronic asthma? Yes, sir. Usually manageable, but the inhaler ran out and we couldn't afford... Daniel cut himself off, embarrassment flooding through him. Dr. Harrison was already moving. Nancy, he called to a passing nurse. Get this child to pediatric trauma 3 immediately. Full nebulizer treatment, check oxygen saturation, and get Dr. Patel if she's still on shift. Sir, the nurse started, they haven't been triaged yet. I'm ordering it, Dr. Harrison cut her off. Now, before Daniel could process what was happening, they were being whisked through the emergency doors he'd been staring at for 3 hours. The transition from the chaos of the waiting room to the controlled efficiency of the treatment area was jarring. Maddie was transferred to a bed with practiced ease, an oxygen monitor clipped to her finger, a nebulizer mask placed over her face. The medication will help her breathe easier, a young resident explained as the machine hummed to life, delivering blessed medicine to Maddie's struggling lungs. We'll monitor her for the next hour, maybe do a chest x-ray to be safe. Daniel stood beside the bed, holding Maddie's hand, feeling like he'd fallen through a rabbit hole into someone else's life. 3 hours of waiting, and now suddenly they were receiving VIP treatment because he'd helped someone who turned out to be important. The unfairness of it, that Maddie was getting care not because she needed it, but because of who they'd helped, sat bitter in his throat. Mr. Ross? He turned to find Dr. Harrison standing in the doorway. She's asking for you, the doctor said simply. Miss Jennings. She wants to meet the person who helped her. Daniel looked at Maddie, who was already breathing easier, the medicine doing its work. She waved him away with the hand not holding Mr. Peanuts. Go, Daddy. I'm okay now. The walk to Olivia Jennings' room felt surreal. They passed through increasingly restricted areas, each set of doors requiring Dr. Harrison's keycard, until they reached a section of the hospital Daniel hadn't even known existed. The floors were carpeted here, the lighting softer, the walls decorated with actual art rather than health advisories. Our VIP wing, Dr. Harrison explained unnecessarily. The room they entered looked more like a high-end hotel suite than a hospital room. Multiple monitors displayed vital signs with quiet efficiency, but they were discreetly positioned behind wooden panels. The bed looked like it could swallow 3 people, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Chicago's skyline that probably cost more than Daniel's annual salary. But what struck Daniel most was how small Olivia Jennings looked in that enormous bed. Without the context of her wealth and status, she was just a young woman who'd almost died. Her face was still pale, but color was returning to her cheeks. The oxygen cannula under her nose seemed like an insult to her carefully applied makeup, now smudged beyond recognition. Her green eyes, when they found Daniel, were filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. You're the one, she said, her voice hoarse but clear. The man with the little girl. Yes, ma'am. She laughed, a sound that turned into a cough. Ma'am? I'm 26, not 60. Please, call me Olivia. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Everything about this felt wrong. Him in his concrete, dusty work clothes, standing in a room that cost more per night than he made in a month, talking to a woman whose donations kept this hospital running. How's your daughter? Olivia asked. Better? They're giving her a breathing treatment now. Because of Marcus here, I'm assuming. She shot Dr. Harrison a look that was somehow both grateful and reproving. He has a tendency to bend rules when it suits him. Only for good causes, Dr. Harrison defended. Like me? Olivia's tone was bitter. Because I sign checks? An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Daniel understood suddenly that he'd walked into the middle of something, a dynamic he didn't fully understand. I should go, he started, but Olivia raised a hand. Please, stay. I need to thank you properly. No thanks necessary. Do you know what happened to me tonight? She interrupted. Before I ended up on that ER floor? Daniel shook his head. I was at a charity gala. My own charity gala, actually, raising money for, ironically enough, improving emergency room care in underserved communities. She laughed again, bitter as black coffee. I started feeling sick during dinner. Couldn't breathe properly. My throat was closing up. I tried to discreetly leave, didn't want to make a scene. You know what's funny? I was surrounded by 300 of Chicago's wealthiest people, and not one of them noticed I was dying. She paused, seeming to gather her strength. I made it to the bathroom, realized I was having an allergic reaction to something. Still don't know what. My phone was in my evening bag, which I'd left at the table. I tried to go back, but by then my lungs were filling with fluid from the respiratory infection I didn't even know I had. Perfect storm, the doctors say. I stumbled out of the hotel, trying to get to my car, to my driver, but I couldn't find them. Ended up walking 6 blocks in the rain, in heels, coughing blood, before I finally found a taxi. Daniel remained silent, sensing she needed to tell this story. The taxi driver took one look at me and drove off. Said he didn't want that kind of trouble in his cab. The second one demanded payment up front, and I didn't have my wallet. The third one finally agreed to take me, but only to the nearest hospital, not Northwestern, where I have privileges. And you know what I realized, lying on that ER floor? She looked directly at Daniel, and he saw tears tracking down her cheeks. Nobody cared. Not one person in that waiting room cared that I was dying. They all assumed I was drunk, or high, or somehow deserving of what was happening to me. 300 people at a gala about improving healthcare, and not one noticed I needed help. Dozens of people in that ER, and they stepped over me like I was trash. Except for you. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so normal, so human, that it transformed her from Olivia Jennings, the billionaire, to just Olivia, a scared young woman who'd almost died alone. You didn't know who I was. You had your sick daughter to worry about. You had every reason to take your turn, to follow the rules, to mind your own business. But you didn't. Why? Daniel thought about the question, about how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. My wife died 3 years ago, he said finally, heart condition that got ignored because we looked like we couldn't pay. She died in our bed while our daughter slept between us. I promised myself that night, if I ever had the chance to stop someone else from dying alone and ignored, I would. Didn't matter who they were or why they were sick. Nobody should die like that. The room was quiet, except for the soft beep of monitors and the distant sound of the hospital's endless activity. I'm sorry about your wife, Olivia said softly. I'm sorry about tonight, Daniel replied. Money shouldn't make people less human to each other. No, Olivia agreed. It shouldn't. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. I should check on your daughter, Mr. Ross. Make sure she's responding well to treatment. It was a clear dismissal, but a kind one. Daniel nodded, started to leave, but Olivia's voice stopped him. What's your daughter's name? Madison. Maddie. What's your name? Your first name? Daniel. She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Thank you, Daniel, for seeing me as a person. You'd be surprised how rare that is in my world. Daniel left the VIP suite and made his way back to pediatric emergency, his mind struggling to process the last hour. He found Maddie sitting up in bed, the color returned to her cheeks, enthusiastically telling a nurse about her favorite cartoon while the nebulizer continued its work. Daddy, she exclaimed when she saw him. The medicine tastes funny, but I can breathe now, and Nurse Jennifer says I'm the bravest patient she's had all night. That's my girl, Daniel said, sinking into the chair beside her bed. The exhaustion of the day, the physical labor, the stress of Maddie's attack, the surreal encounter with Olivia Jennings hit him all at once. Is the lady okay? Maddie asked. The sick one you helped? She's going to be fine. Good. Maddie adjusted Mr. Peanut so he could better see the monitors. Maybe she just needed someone to be nice to her. Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought. They stayed for another 2 hours while the doctors monitored Maddie's response to treatment. Around midnight, a different nurse appeared with discharge papers and a small white bag. Your discharge instructions are all here, she said, along with a month's supply of both maintenance and emergency inhalers. Everything's been taken care of. Daniel frowned. I haven't given you my insurance information yet. It's been handled, the nurse said with a knowing smile. Just make sure to follow up with your pediatrician this week. Daniel knew better than to argue. He gathered Maddie, now drowsy from the medication in the late hour, and carried her to the exit. His truck was where he'd left it in the parking garage, accumulating hourly fees he couldn't afford. But when he tried to pay at the exit kiosk, the attendant waved him through. Already paid, the man said, looking as confused as Daniel felt. The drive home was quiet, Maddie asleep in her booster seat, clutching Mr. Peanuts. Their apartment building looked especially shabby after the gleaming halls of Chicago Memorial, but it was home. Daniel carried Maddie up 3 flights of stairs, tucked her into her bed with its Disney princess sheets, and stood watching her breathe easily for the first time in hours. His phone, forgotten in his pocket, buzzed with messages. His foreman, wondering about tomorrow. His sister, checking in as she did every few days. And an unknown number with a Chicago area code. Curious, he opened the last message. Daniel, thank you again for tonight. I've been thinking about what you said, about people dying alone and ignored. I'd like to talk to you about a project I'm working on, if you're interested. No obligations, just a conversation. Olivia Jennings, P.S. I hope Maddie is breathing easier. Daniel stared at the message, wondering what possible project a billionaire healthcare CEO could want to discuss with a construction worker. But that was tomorrow's mystery. Tonight, his daughter was breathing easy. A stranger was alive because he'd made a choice, and sometimes that was enough. He walked to his bedroom, stopping at the photo of Sarah on the hallway wall. She smiled back at him, frozen in time at their last anniversary, unaware that she had only 3 months left. I did what you would have done, he told her picture. I know it was risky with Maddie sick, but I couldn't just let her die. Nobody should die like you did, Sarah. Nobody. The photo, of course, didn't respond. But Daniel felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the apartment's overworked radiator. For the first time in 3 years, he'd done something that felt like honoring Sarah's memory properly, not just by surviving, not just by raising their daughter, but by being the kind of person she'd believed he could be. Outside, Chicago rumbled on through the night, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in its hospitals and homes. But in one small apartment, a father stood in the doorway of his daughter's room, watching her chest rise and fall without struggle, and felt something shift in the universe. Not a large shift, not yet, but the kind of tiny movement that sometimes preceded avalanches. His phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Mr. Ross, this is Dr. Harrison. I wanted to let you know that we've scheduled Maddie for a full respiratory workup with our best pediatric pulmonologist next week. No charge. Also, I've been practicing emergency medicine for 30 years, and what you did tonight, well, it reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place. Thank you for that. Daniel set his phone aside and finally allowed himself to collapse onto his bed, still fully clothed. Tomorrow, he'd have to figure out what all this meant. The mysterious project Olivia wanted to discuss, the free medical care, the strange feeling that his simple act of giving up an ER spot had set something larger in motion. But tonight, he just wanted to sleep, knowing that somewhere in the city, in a VIP hospital suite, a young woman was breathing freely because he'd chosen to see her as human. And in the room next door, his daughter was doing the same, her medicine paid for by the gratitude of someone who'd learned what it meant to be truly seen. The rain that had soaked Olivia Jennings had stopped, and through his bedroom window, Daniel could see stars fighting through Chicago's light pollution. They were faint, barely visible, but they were there. Sometimes that was all you needed, the faintest light in the darkness, the smallest gesture of humanity, the tiniest shift in the universe. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. His foreman would be furious about the missed shift. The bills would still be piled on the kitchen counter. The truck would still need new tires he couldn't afford. But tonight, Daniel Ross fell asleep with something he hadn't felt in 3 years, the sense that maybe, just maybe, the world could still surprise him with its capacity for grace. And in her hospital bed across the city, Olivia Jennings lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment a stranger had chosen her life over his daughter's immediate care. She'd built an empire on calculated decisions and strategic moves, but this simple, illogical act of compassion had shattered something inside her. She picked up her phone, scrolling through the hundreds of messages from people who'd just learned about her near-death experience. Board members offering private physicians, society friends expressing shock that she'd been in a public ER, her own executives demanding to know why her security detail hadn't been with her. Not one of them asked if she was okay. Not one expressed genuine concern for her as a person rather than as a position, a bank account, a connection to power. Except for Daniel Ross, who didn't even know her name when he'd saved her life. Olivia made a decision then, lying in her expensive hospital bed, surrounded by the best medical technology money could buy. The project she'd been conceptualizing for months, a complete overhaul of emergency care accessibility, suddenly had a face. Daniel's face, and Maddie's, and Sarah Ross's, who died because the system Olivia presided over had failed her. She started typing notes into her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with renewed energy. By dawn, she'd have a proposal. By the end of the week, she'd have a plan. And somehow, she'd convince Daniel Ross to help her implement it. Because if a construction worker could save a billionaire's life by choosing compassion over convention, imagine what they could accomplish if they worked together to fix the system that had nearly killed them both. Her with its indifference to her humanity, him with its discrimination against his poverty. The monitors beeped steadily, a mechanical heartbeat in the quiet room. Olivia closed her eyes and for the first time in years didn't feel alone. Somewhere in the city, a little girl was breathing easier because of her resources. And that little girl's father had reminded her that wealth meant nothing if you'd lost the ability to recognize humanity in others and have them recognize it in you. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of something new. Not just a new project or a new initiative, but a new understanding of what power could accomplish when guided by the kind of simple morality that made a father give up his place in line to save a stranger. The Chicago night wrapped around the hospital like a living thing, carrying the stories of all those who suffered and survived within its walls. And in the midst of all that pain and hope, 2 lives had intersected in the most unlikely way, setting in motion changes that would ripple outward in ways neither could imagine. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight was about survival and breathing, and the radical act of seeing others as human. Tonight, that was enough. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of Daniel's apartment, painting golden stripes across the worn carpet. He'd managed 3 hours of sleep before his internal clock, calibrated by years of early construction shifts, pulled him from unconsciousness. His first instinct was to check on Maddie, finding her still sleeping peacefully, her breathing clear and even. The emergency inhalers sat on her nightstand like tiny guardians, their presence both reassuring and surreal. His phone showed 17 missed calls from his foreman, Frank Martinez, a man whose vocabulary consisted primarily of construction terms and creative profanity. Daniel stepped onto the narrow balcony that served as his thinking space and returned the call, bracing himself for the inevitable explosion. "Ross, where the hell were you? We had to pour the foundation without you, and Tommy screwed up the grade. The whole thing's gonna need to be redone, and that's coming out of someone's paycheck." "Maddie had an attack, Frank. We were at the ER all night." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Daniel wondered if the call had dropped. When Frank spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. "She okay?" "Yeah, she's good now. Look, I can be there in an hour." "Forget it. Take the day. But I need you tomorrow, Danny. The Millennium Project's already behind schedule, and you're my best concrete guy." After Frank hung up, Daniel stood on the balcony, watching Chicago wake up around him. The city looked different somehow, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, or maybe it was the strange feeling that last night had been some kind of fever dream. Billionaire heiresses didn't text construction workers. VIP hospital suites were things that existed in other people's worlds, not his. But the message from Olivia Jennings was still there on his phone, as real as the October chill in the air. He made breakfast quietly, not wanting to wake Maddie yet. She needed the sleep, and he needed time to think. The coffee maker gurgled and protested, producing something that approximated coffee if you didn't think about it too hard. He sat at the small kitchen table, the same one where Sarah used to grade papers in the evenings, and tried to make sense of what had happened. The knock at his door was soft but insistent. Daniel frowned, checking the time. 7:30 in the morning was too early for visitors and too late for the kind of trouble that came calling at night. He opened the door to find a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed, with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. "Mr. Ross, my name is Margaret Chen. I work for Miss Jennings. May I come in?" Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. His apartment wasn't the kind of place people like Margaret Chen visited. The furniture was secondhand, the walls needed painting, and there were cobwebs in corners he couldn't reach without a ladder he didn't own. But there was something in her manner that wasn't judgmental, just efficiently observant. "Coffee," he offered, gesturing her inside. "That would be lovely, thank you." She sat at his kitchen table without commenting on the stack of overdue bills visible beneath yesterday's mail, or the crack in the window sealed with duct tape, or the way the linoleum was peeling near the stove. She simply sat, hands folded, waiting while he poured coffee into his least chipped mug. "Ms. Jennings asked me to deliver this," Margaret said, placing an envelope on the table. "She also wanted me to extend an invitation to meet with her this afternoon, if you're available." Daniel didn't touch the envelope. "What's this about?" "I believe she wants to discuss a business proposition. She was quite insistent that I emphasize this isn't charity, Mr. Ross. She has a genuine professional interest in your perspective on something." "My perspective? I pour concrete for a living, Miss Chen. What could I possibly offer someone like Olivia Jennings?" Margaret smiled, the expression transforming her stern features. "You'd be surprised what perspectives matter when you're trying to solve certain problems. 2 o'clock, if you can manage it? The address is in the envelope." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mr. Ross, I've worked for the Jennings family for 20 years. I've never seen Olivia this energized about a project. Whatever you did last night, it mattered." After she left, Daniel sat staring at the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on stationery so expensive he was afraid to touch it with his work-roughened hands. "Daniel, please come. This isn't about gratitude, though I have plenty of that. This is about changing things. Real change. The kind that would have saved Sarah." Oh. The use of his wife's name stopped him cold. It felt invasive at first, then he realized Olivia had probably had him researched. When you had that much money, information was just another commodity. But something about the directness of it, the acknowledgement of what this was really about, made him consider the invitation seriously. Maddie wandered into the kitchen around 9, Mr. Peanuts dragging behind her, his trunk worn thin from years of love. "Morning, baby girl. How are you feeling?" "Good." "I can breathe all the way in, see?" She demonstrated with an exaggerated deep breath. "Are you going to work?" "Not today. Frank gave me the day off to make sure you're okay." Her face lit up. "Can we go to the park? Please? I promise I won't run too much." They spent the morning at Humboldt Park, Maddie feeding ducks with bread they probably couldn't afford to waste while Daniel watched her like a hawk for any signs of breathing trouble. But she was fine. Better than fine, actually. The medicine had worked its magic, and she ran and played with an energy that made his chest tight with a mixture of love and fear. At noon, Daniel called his sister Carmen to watch Maddie for the afternoon. Carmen arrived with her usual whirlwind energy, immediately starting to clean his kitchen, while simultaneously lecturing him about his housekeeping and interrogating him about why he needed a babysitter. "You got a date, Danny?" "Finally?" "It's a business meeting." Carmen stopped mid-wipe, turning to stare at him. "You pour concrete." "What kind of business meeting?" "It's complicated. Everything with you is complicated since Sarah died. You know that's not what she would have wanted." "Carmen, please. Not today." She must have seen something in his face because she stopped pushing, instead focusing on Maddie, who was delighted to have her aunt's attention. Daniel kissed his daughter goodbye, promising to bring home pizza for dinner, and left before he could lose his nerve. The address in the envelope led him to a building in the loop that seemed to stretch toward heaven, all glass and steel ambition. The lobby alone was bigger than his entire apartment building, with marble floors that reflected the afternoon light like pools of honey. Security guards who looked like they could bench press Daniel himself stood at strategic points, their eyes tracking everyone who entered. Daniel approached the reception desk, acutely aware of his best jeans and the button-down shirt that was clean but had been washed so many times the color was more suggestion than fact. "I'm here to see Olivia Jennings. My name is Daniel Ross." The receptionist's fingers flew across her keyboard. Her expression shifted from professional dismissal to surprised attention. "Yes, Mr. Ross. Ms. Jennings is expecting you. Private elevator to the penthouse, please. Marcus will show you." Marcus turned out to be another security guard who led Daniel to an elevator that required a special key to operate. The ride up took long enough that his ears popped twice, and when the doors opened, Daniel stepped into another world. The penthouse office occupied the entire top floor, with windows on all sides offering a view of Chicago that made the city look like a child's toy set. The space was modern but warm, with actual trees growing in strategic places and a water feature that somehow made the sound of traffic 50 floors below seem like a distant memory. Olivia Jennings stood at the far window, no longer the dying woman on the ER floor, but every inch the CEO in a business suit that probably cost more than Daniel's truck. When she turned, though, her smile was the same one she'd given him in the hospital, genuine and slightly uncertain. "You came. I was curious." "Good. Curiosity's more useful than gratitude. Can I show you something?" She led him to a conference table where architectural plans were spread out alongside photographs and statistical reports. Daniel recognized the style of the blueprints. He'd worked on enough construction sites to read them easily. "This is a new kind of emergency care facility," Olivia explained, her voice taking on the passion of someone discussing their obsession. "Not a traditional ER, but something different, sliding scale payment system. No insurance verification before treatment. Triage based solely on medical need, not ability to pay. 24-hour pharmacy attached with generic medications available at cost." Daniel studied the plans, his contractor's eye noting the practical layout, the efficient flow of traffic, the way the design would allow maximum patients with minimum wait. This is ambitious. This is necessary. Do you know how many people die each year because they delay emergency care due to cost concerns, or get inadequate treatment because they look like they can't pay? "At least one," Daniel said quietly. Olivia nodded. "At least one too many. But here's the problem. I can build the facilities. I have the money, the connections, the ability to make this happen. What I don't have is credibility." Daniel looked up from the plans. "You run one of the largest healthcare companies in the country." "Exactly. When I propose reforms, people see a rich woman playing with social causes. When I talk about accessibility, they see someone who's never had to choose between rent and medication. I need someone who's lived it, who understands the reality of being on the other side of the system." "And you think that's me?" "I know it's you. You gave up your daughter's spot in the ER for a stranger. You understand both the desperation and the dignity of people in crisis. I want you to help me design these facilities, not the buildings, but the experience, the human element." Daniel laughed, the sound bitter in the pristine office. "Ms. Jennings, Olivia, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I pour concrete. I don't know anything about healthcare administration or facility design or whatever it is you think I can offer. You know about being dismissed by an exhausted triage nurse. You know about watching your child struggle to breathe while you count the minutes. You know about choosing between gas to get to work and medication to keep your family alive. That knowledge is worth more than an MBA to this project." She moved to another set of documents, these showing budgets and projections that made Daniel's head spin. "I'm offering you a position as community liaison and patient experience consultant. Full benefits, including comprehensive health care for you and Maddie. Salary of $90,000 to start, with increases based on project milestones. You'd work with our design team, our medical staff, our administrators, to ensure that every decision we make considers the people who need us most." Daniel felt the floor shift beneath him. Or maybe that was just vertigo from the height and the impossibility of what was being offered. You want to hire me because I gave up my place in line? I want to hire you because you see people as human beings first and economic units second. That's rarer than you might think in my industry. What if I'm terrible at it? What if I can't do what you're asking? Olivia's expression softened. What if you can? What if your perspective is exactly what's been missing from every well-intentioned but ultimately failed healthcare reform? What if Sarah's death could mean something beyond grief? The use of his wife's name should have angered him, but instead it cracked something open in his chest. For 3 years, he'd carried the weight of Sarah's death like a stone, accomplishing nothing but survival. This felt like something more. I need to think about it, he said finally. Of course. But while you're thinking, let me show you something else. She led him to another window, this one facing north. In the distance, Daniel could make out a construction site, cranes and equipment visible even from this height. That's the first site, Olivia said. Breaking ground next month, whether you help or not. But with you, it could be something special, something that actually works for the people who need it. Daniel's phone buzzed. Carmen, texting that Maddie was asking when he'd be home with pizza. The reminder of his real life, his responsibilities, grounded him. I should go. My daughter's waiting. Of course. Margaret will drive you home. I can take the L. Please, let me do this one thing without argument. The ride home in the black town car was surreal, watching his familiar neighborhood pass by through tinted windows that made everything look like a movie. Margaret didn't speak except to confirm his address, but when they pulled up to his building, she handed him a card. My direct number. When you're ready to accept the position, and you will accept it, Mr. Ross, call me. We'll handle everything. Daniel climbed the stairs to his apartment, his mind churning. He could hear Maddie's laughter through the door, playing some game with Carmen. He stood in the hallway for a moment, hand on the doorknob, trying to imagine a life where he didn't have to check his bank balance before buying her medicine, where he could say yes when she asked for dance classes or soccer registration, where her asthma wasn't a financial crisis waiting to happen. But more than that, he thought about Sarah, about the night she died, how he'd raged at the unfairness of a system that valued profit over people. He'd fantasized about revenge, about justice, about somehow making them pay for what they'd taken from him. But this was different. This was a chance to change things from the inside to prevent other families from suffering what he had suffered. He opened the door to find Maddie and Carmen building a fort out of couch cushions, the living room destroyed in that spectacular way that spoke of childhood joy. Maddie looked up, her face bright with excitement. Daddy! Aunt Carmen said we could have ice cream with our pizza if you said yes. Can we? Please. Sure, baby girl. Ice cream sounds perfect. Later, after Carmen had left and Maddie was asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with Olivia's offer spread before him. $90,000, benefits, a chance to matter in a way that construction work, for all its honest satisfaction, never would. But also stepping into a world he didn't understand, working with people who'd gone to schools he couldn't afford to visit, making decisions that would affect thousands of lives. His phone rang, startling him. The caller ID showed Chicago Memorial Hospital. Mr. Ross? This is Dr. Harrison. I hope I'm not calling too late. No, sir. Is everything okay? More than okay, actually. I wanted to let you know that Maddie's appointment with our pulmonologist has been scheduled for Thursday. Dr. Reyes is the best in the city. But I'm also calling about something else. I heard about Olivia's offer. News travels fast. In certain circles, yes. I wanted to tell you something that might help with your decision. I've been pushing for reforms like what Olivia's proposing for 20 years. Every time, we get blocked by people who've never had to wait for care, who've never had to choose between their health and their home. We need voices like yours, Mr. Ross, desperately. I'm just a construction worker, Dr. Harrison. No, you're a father who understands what it's like to navigate a system that wasn't built for you. You're a widower who knows the ultimate cost of that system's failures. And you're a man who chose compassion over convenience when it mattered most. That's not just anything. After the call ended, Daniel walked to Maddie's room and stood in her doorway, watching her sleep. Mr. Peanuts was tucked under her arm, and her new inhalers sat within easy reach on the nightstand. In the soft glow of her nightlight, she looked so much like Sarah it made his chest ache. He thought about the morning Sarah died, how Maddie had tried to wake her mother for breakfast, not understanding why she wouldn't respond. He thought about the funeral, where well-meaning people told him everything happened for a reason, that God had a plan. He'd wanted to scream at them that the only plan was a healthcare system that saw Sarah as a liability rather than a life. But now, maybe there was a different plan. Maybe Sarah's death didn't have to be meaningless. Maybe it could be the catalyst for something better. Daniel picked up his phone and typed a message to Olivia. "I'll do it, on one condition. The first facility we build, the one breaking ground next month, I want it named after Sarah. Sarah Ross Memorial Emergency Care Center." The response came within minutes. "Done. Welcome to the team, Daniel. We're going to change everything." He set down the phone and walked back to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in apartments like his, families were making impossible choices about healthcare. Children were wheezing through the night because their parents couldn't afford preventive care. People were dying from treatable conditions because they couldn't pay for treatment. But maybe, just maybe, that was about to change. Not all at once, not dramatically, but one facility at a time, one reformed policy at a time, one saved life at a time. The next morning, Daniel woke to find Maddie already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, studying him with those two wise eyes she'd inherited from her mother. "Something's different," she announced. "What makes you say that?" "You look lighter, like when you're carrying groceries and you finally get to put them down." Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought for the second time in as many days. "Things are going to change, baby girl. Good changes." "Are we moving?" "No, same apartment, but Daddy got a new job. One where I can help make sure other kids who get sick like you do get the help they need." Maddie considered this, taking it in with the seriousness only a 6-year-old could manage. "Will you still come home for dinner?" "Every night." "Will I still go to the same school?" "Yes." "Can we keep Mr. Peanuts?" Daniel laughed, crossing to hug his daughter. "We're definitely keeping Mr. Peanuts." "Then I think the changes are good," she declared, returning to her cereal. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Frank Martinez. "Heard you're leaving us for the corporate world. Don't forget us little people when you're changing the world, Ross." He smiled, typing back, "Pour one bad foundation in my honor, Frank." "Already did." "It's terrible. You'd hate it." The exchange was perfect in its simplicity, the kind of goodbye that acknowledged change without dwelling on it. Daniel knew he'd missed the straightforward nature of construction work, the satisfaction of seeing concrete take shape, the camaraderie of men who built things with their hands. But he wouldn't miss the constant financial anxiety, the physical exhaustion, the knowledge that one injury could destroy everything. Margaret Chen arrived at 10 sharp, this time with a folder of paperwork and a laptop. "We'll need to get you set up with everything today," she said, transforming his kitchen table into a makeshift office. "Direct deposit information, insurance elections, security clearances for the various facilities you'll be visiting." "Security clearances?" "You'll have access to patient information, facility designs, proprietary data. It's all standard, but necessary." As they worked through the paperwork, Daniel began to understand the scope of what he'd agreed to. This wasn't just about the emergency care facilities. Olivia's vision extended to mobile health units, community education programs, partnerships with schools and community centers. It was healthcare reimagined from the ground up, with accessibility as the foundation rather than an afterthought. "There's one more thing," Margaret said, producing a credit card. "Corporate card for expenses. Travel, meals during meetings, anything related to your work. Ms. Jennings was very specific that you're not to pay for anything out of pocket." Daniel stared at the card, his name embossed in silver letters. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with possibility and responsibility. "I don't know how to be a corporate person," he admitted. Margaret's expression softened. "Mr. Ross, you're not meant to be a corporate person. You're meant to be exactly who you are, someone who understands the human cost of corporate decisions. Don't try to be someone else. That would defeat the entire purpose." She left him with a schedule for the next week, meetings with architects, sessions with medical directors, site visits to existing facilities to understand what worked and what didn't. It was overwhelming, but there was something else too. Hope. For the first time in 3 years, genuine hope that things could be different. That afternoon, Daniel took Maddie to her favorite playground, pushing her on the swings while she laughed with pure joy. Other parents were there, some he recognized from the neighborhood. Maria Gonzalez with her twins, both of whom had diabetes. Tom Chen, whose father lived with them and needed regular dialysis. The Hendersons, whose son had cerebral palsy and required constant care they could barely afford. All of them had stories like his. All of them had fought the same system that had failed Sarah, and now, impossibly, he was in a position to do something about it. "Higher, Daddy," Maddie called, and he pushed her toward the sky, her laughter carrying across the playground like a promise. That evening, as he tucked her into bed, Maddie asked, "Do you think Mommy would be proud of your new job?" Daniel kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I think she would be, baby girl. I think she'd be very proud." "Me too," Maddie said, already drifting toward sleep. "She always said you were going to do something important someday." As Daniel turned off the light and closed her door, he thought about Sarah's unwavering faith in him, even when he'd been laid off, even when they were struggling, even when the world seemed determined to grind them down. She'd believed he was meant for something more than just survival. His phone lit up with a message from Olivia. "First planning meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. Fair warning. The board thinks I'm crazy for bringing you on. Prove them wrong?" Daniel typed back, "I'll do my best." "That's all anyone can ask. See you tomorrow, partner." Partner. The word sat strangely but not unpleasantly in his mind. 3 days ago, he'd been a construction worker barely making ends meet, watching his daughter struggle to breathe in an overcrowded ER. Now he was partnering with one of the most powerful women in Chicago to reshape healthcare accessibility. Life, Daniel reflected, had a strange sense of timing. Sarah used to say that the universe put you exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there. He'd stopped believing that when she died, when the universe had failed to put her where she needed to be to survive. But maybe she'd been partially right. Maybe the universe did position people sometimes, not for their own sake, but for what they could do for others. He stood at his window, looking out at the city, thinking about all the Daniel and Sarah Rosses out there, all the Maddies who needed help, all the people falling through cracks that should never have existed in the first place. Tomorrow, he'd walk into a corporate boardroom for the first time in his life. He'd sit at tables where million-dollar decisions were made with the casual ease most people ordered coffee. But he wouldn't forget this view from a third-floor apartment where every dollar mattered, where medical bills were catastrophes, where giving up your spot in an ER could mean risking your child's life. That was his qualification, his expertise, his value, not despite his struggles, but because of them. The city lights twinkled below, each one representing lives and stories and struggles he might actually be able to affect. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. His phone rang one more time that night. Dr. Harrison again. "I wanted to tell you something else," the doctor said without preamble. "About that night in the ER. I've been thinking about it, about what you did. In 30 years of emergency medicine, I've seen every kind of human behavior. Selfishness, sacrifice, indifference, compassion. But what you did was different. You didn't just help someone in need. You recognized humanity in someone everyone else had written off. That's the kind of vision this project needs. I just did what felt right." Exactly. And that's what's been missing from healthcare reform. People who do what feels right instead of what's profitable or politically expedient. Don't lose that instinct, Mr. Ross. It's going to be more valuable than you know. After the call, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, looking at the plans Olivia had given him to review. The Sarah Ross Memorial Emergency Care Center would serve one of Chicago's most underserved neighborhoods. It would be a beacon, Olivia had said, proof that healthcare could be both excellent and accessible. He traced the outline of the building with his finger, imagining the lives that would be saved there, the families that wouldn't have to experience what his had. It wouldn't bring Sarah back. Nothing could do that. But it would make her death mean something more than just another statistic in a broken system's ledger. The boardroom at Jennings Medical Group headquarters felt like stepping into a shark tank dressed as bait. Daniel stood at the threshold, taking in the polished mahogany table that could seat 20, the oil paintings of stern-faced former executives, and the floor-to-ceiling windows that made Chicago look conquerable. Around the table sat a collection of suits that probably cost more than his annual salary had been just yesterday, each face bearing the practiced neutrality of people who'd learned to hide their thoughts behind MBA degrees and stock portfolios. Olivia stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding even among these titans of industry. When she saw Daniel, something in her posture shifted, a subtle relaxation that only he seemed to notice. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Daniel Ross, our new community liaison and patient experience consultant. The silence that followed could have frozen Lake Michigan. Daniel felt 14 pairs of eyes dissecting him, cataloging his department store suit, his calloused hands, the way he didn't quite know where to put himself in this room that breathed money and influence. This is the construction worker? The question came from a man whose silver hair was so perfectly styled it looked weaponized. His nameplate read Harrison Blackwood, CFO. This is the man who understands our target demographic better than anyone else at this table, Olivia replied, her tone suggesting this wasn't up for debate. With all due respect, a woman in pearls interjected, what qualifications does Mr. Ross have for this position? Has he studied healthcare administration, public health, business management? Daniel cleared his throat, and every head swiveled toward him. No, ma'am. What I have is a dead wife who might be alive if your emergency rooms treated people like humans instead of credit scores. I have a daughter whose asthma attacks cost more than I make in a month. And I have 3 years of experience navigating a healthcare system that seems designed to extract maximum profit from minimum care. The woman's face flushed, but before she could respond, Daniel continued. You want qualifications? I can tell you exactly how long someone making minimum wage will wait before seeking emergency care because they're calculating whether they can afford to miss work. I can explain why people use superglue on wounds that need stitches, or why they cut blood pressure pills in half to make them last longer. I know what it's like to choose between groceries and medication, to lie awake wondering if that chest pain is serious enough to risk bankruptcy. He moved toward the table, finding his confidence in the truth of his experience. Ms. Jennings showed me your plans for the new facilities. They're impressive. State-of-the-art equipment, innovative triage systems, beautiful architecture. But you know what I didn't see? A place for people to charge their phones so they can call family for rides home because they can't afford an ambulance. Vending machines with actual food instead of just candy, because sometimes people wait 8 hours without eating. Clear signage in multiple languages, not just English and Spanish, but Polish, Mandarin, Arabic, the languages of Chicago's actual population. A younger man at the table leaned forward. Those are minor details. Those are the details that determine whether people trust you enough to come in before they're dying, Daniel shot back. Those are the differences between a hospital that serves its community and one that just exists in it. Olivia moved to a projection screen, bringing up architectural renderings. Mr. Ross has already identified 47 modifications to our initial designs that will improve patient experience while actually reducing operational costs. Would you like to explain the waiting room concept, Daniel? Daniel looked at the plans, remembering his night in the ER with Maddie. Traditional emergency waiting rooms are designed like bus stations, rows of uncomfortable chairs facing forward, no privacy, no dignity. People in crisis forced to suffer in public. Your plans follow that same model, just with nicer chairs. He moved to the screen, pointing to different areas. Instead, create pods. Semi-private spaces where families can wait together without being on display. Include charging stations because people need their phones for support, for distraction, for coordinating care. Make some pods larger for extended families. In many communities, medical decisions involve multiple generations. Put children's pods near the pediatric entrance so sick kids don't have to navigate through adult trauma. That would cost, Blackwood began. An additional $200,000 per facility, Daniel finished. I did the math. You know what costs more? People leaving without being seen because the environment is so hostile, they'd rather risk dying at home. The national average for LWBS, left without being seen, is 2 to 3%. In underserved communities, it's closer to 8%. Each of those represents not just lost revenue, but a potential lawsuit when someone dies after leaving. The room fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of recalculation rather than dismissal. Show them the pharmacy concept, Olivia prompted. Daniel pulled up another slide, this one his own rough sketch that Olivia's team had transformed into a professional rendering. Attached pharmacy, open 24 hours, with a sliding scale payment system. But here's the key. It's inside the security perimeter. People can fill prescriptions without leaving the building, without having to find transportation to another location. Stock it with generic versions of the 100 most prescribed medications. Sell them at cost plus 15%, just enough to keep it operational. We're not a charity, someone muttered. No, Daniel agreed. But every person who can't afford their medication ends up back in your ER within 30 days. And emergency care costs 10 times what preventive care does. This isn't charity, it's economics. A woman who'd been silent until now raised her hand slightly, an oddly formal gesture. Mr. Ross, I'm Dr. Patricia Winters, Head of Emergency Services. Your ideas are interesting, but have you considered the security implications? These facilities will be in challenging neighborhoods. Daniel almost laughed. Dr. Winters, I live in one of those challenging neighborhoods. You know what makes them challenging? Poverty, desperation, the constant calculation of whether you can afford to be sick. You want better security? Hire people from the community. Not just guards, but translators, patient advocates, people who understand the population because they are the population. Hire locals? Blackwood looked like Daniel had suggested staffing the facilities with circus performers. My neighbor, Marcus Thompson, did 2 tours in Afghanistan, came home with a Purple Heart, and can't find work because he doesn't have a degree. He speaks 3 languages, understands crowd control, and knows everyone in a 6-block radius. You'd rather hire a security firm that sends strangers in uniforms that make them look like police. Olivia pulled up employment statistics for the target neighborhoods. Unemployment in these areas runs 15 to 20%. We could create a hiring program that provides jobs while improving community relations. Train local residents as medical assistants, administrative staff, security, maintenance. They get careers, not just jobs. We get employees who are invested in the facility's success because it serves their own families. The conversation continued for 2 more hours, with Daniel fielding questions that ranged from hostile to genuinely curious. He talked about his wife's death only when necessary, using it as data rather than emotional manipulation. He spoke about Maddie's asthma with clinical detachment, explaining the cascading financial impact of chronic illness on working families. By the end, even Blackwood was taking notes. As the meeting concluded, board members filed out with the kind of subdued murmuring that suggested minds were changing, or at least opening. Dr. Winters lingered, approaching Daniel as he gathered his papers. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I've been running emergency departments for 20 years, and I've never once thought about phone chargers or translation services beyond Spanish. I've been treating symptoms, not causes. We all do what we can with what we know, Daniel replied. She handed him her card. I'd like to walk through Chicago Memorial's ER with you sometime. See it through your eyes. Would you be willing? Before he could answer, Olivia's assistant appeared. Mr. Ross, Ms. Jennings would like to see you in her office. The CEO's private office was somehow both more and less intimidating than the boardroom. More because this was clearly the nerve center of the empire, with multiple screens showing real-time data from facilities across the region. Less because Olivia had kicked off her heels and was sitting on a couch with her feet tucked under her, looking more like a tired young woman than a business mogul. You did well, she said, gesturing for him to sit. Better than well, actually. Blackwood hasn't taken notes in a meeting since 2019. They hate me. They hate change. But you made them think, which is more than I've managed in months of presentations. She paused, studying him. How are you doing? Really? The question caught him off guard. I'm processing. This morning I was worried about making rent. Now I'm redesigning healthcare delivery for one of the largest medical companies in the country. Having second thoughts? Every minute. But then I think about Maddie in that ER, about Sarah dying in our bed, about all the people who won't have to go through that if we get this right. Olivia pulled out a tablet showing him an email thread. The board is already discussing your ideas. Winters wants to implement the pod concept in our existing facilities immediately. The hiring program has Blackwood running cost-benefit analyses. You've done more in one meeting than consultants have managed in years. Because I'm not a consultant. I'm just someone who's been through the system. Exactly. She set the tablet aside. I need to tell you something. That night in the ER, when I was lying on the floor, I heard everything people said. Junkie, drunk, waste of space. And the terrible thing? Part of me agreed with them. Part of me thought I deserved to be there, dying alone. Because what had I done with all my advantages except perpetuate the same system that was killing me? She stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city. My father built this company on the principle of profit first, care second. I've been trying to change that, but it's like turning an aircraft carrier with a paddle. Then you gave up your daughter's spot for me. A complete stranger. You saw a human being where everyone else saw a problem to be stepped over. Anyone would have... No, she interrupted. They wouldn't. They didn't. Only you did. And that's why I need you, not despite your lack of traditional qualifications, but because of it. You see what the rest of us have been trained to overlook. Daniel's phone buzzed. Carmen, texting that Maddie was asking about dinner again. Go, Olivia said. Be with your daughter. Tomorrow, we start the real work. As the elevator descended from the heights of corporate power to street level, Daniel felt the vertigo of his changing life. This morning, he'd been nobody. Tonight, he was somebody, or at least somebody's hope for change. The L ride home was the same crowded, delayed journey it always was, but Daniel saw it differently now. The tired faces around him weren't just fellow commuters, but potential patients at the facilities he was helping design. The mother with 3 kids probably couldn't afford preventive care. The elderly man with the persistent cough was exactly who would benefit from the 24-hour pharmacy. The teenager holding his wrist at an awkward angle had probably chosen the train over an ambulance. His phone rang as he walked from the station. Dr. Harrison from Chicago Memorial. I heard about your performance today. Olivia's assistant called it revolutionary. Thought you should know you're already making waves. I just told the truth. That's what made it revolutionary. Listen, Maddie's appointment is Thursday at 10. Can you make that? I'll be there. Good. And Mr. Ross, what you said about your wife, about choosing between groceries and medication, that's going to be in my next presentation to the hospital board. With your permission. If it helps, use it. When Daniel reached his apartment building, he found Maddie and Carmen on the front steps, wrapped in jackets against the October chill, playing a clapping game. Daddy! Maddie launched herself at him. Aunt Carmen taught me a new song. Want to hear? Always Baby Girl. As Maddie performed, complete with elaborate hand movements, Daniel caught Carmen's eye. His sister was studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You look different, she said after Maddie finished. Same face, same clothes. No, you look hopeful. I haven't seen that since Sarah. They ordered pizza from Antonio's, their usual place, and ate it on paper plates while Maddie regaled them with stories from school. But when she went to brush her teeth, Carmen cornered Daniel in the kitchen. What's really going on? New job, corporate meetings, Margaret Chen showing up in a town car. This isn't you, Danny. Maybe it is now. And maybe you're in over your head. These people, the Olivia Jennings types, they don't live in our world. They use people like us when it's convenient, then discard us when we've served our purpose. She's not like that. How do you know? Daniel thought about Olivia on the ER floor, dying while people stepped over her, about the loneliness in her eyes when she talked about the charity gala where no one noticed her distress. Because she's been where we are, Carmen. Different circumstances, but the same place. Alone, scared, failed by a system that should have protected her. Carmen looked skeptical but didn't push. After she left, Daniel sat with Maddie while she did her homework, helping with math problems and listening to her read. Normal parent things that felt precious now that he knew they wouldn't be interrupted by financial panic. That night, after Maddie was asleep, Daniel spread the facility plans across his kitchen table again. He made notes in the margins, remembering every frustration from their ER visits. The bathroom doors that were too heavy for someone carrying a sick child, the registration desk that was too high for wheelchair users, the triage window that made private conversation impossible. His phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. When he opened it, he found a photo of a construction site at sunset, cranes silhouetted against the sky. Tomorrow you'll visit this site, where the Sarah Ross Memorial Emergency Care Center will stand. I thought you should see it before we break ground. O'Daniel stared at the image, at the empty lot that would become something meaningful. Sarah would have loved this, not the building itself, but what it represented. She'd always believed in ripples, how one action could spread outward in ways you'd never expect. He walked to their bedroom, his bedroom now, though he still called it theirs, and looked at her picture on the dresser. The photo from their wedding day, both of them so young, so certain that they had decades ahead of them. "I'm trying, Sarah," he whispered. "I'm trying to make it mean something." The photo smiled back, frozen in eternal optimism. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, October asserting itself with determination. Daniel dressed in his new suit. Olivia had insisted on sending him to her tailor, an experience that had involved more measurements than his annual physical, and dropped Maddie at school with promises to hear all about her spelling test that evening. Margaret was waiting in the town car, but this time she wasn't alone. A young man sat beside her, laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. "This is James Park," Margaret said. "He'll be your assistant." "I don't need an assistant." "Yes, you do," James said without looking up from his screen. "You have 14 meetings this week, 3 site visits, and a presentation to prepare for the community stakeholders. Unless you've developed the ability to be in multiple places simultaneously, you need me." The drive to the construction site took them through neighborhoods Daniel knew intimately, corner stores with bars on the windows, check-cashing places that charged predatory rates, liquor stores that outnumbered grocery stores 3 to 1, and everywhere, people making their way through another day of calculated survival. The lot itself was bigger than he'd expected, a full city block cleared of the abandoned warehouses that had stood there since Daniel was a child. Olivia was already there, hard hat on, standing with a group of architects and engineers. "Daniel!" Perfect timing. "We were just discussing the entrance placement." For the next 2 hours, Daniel walked the site, seeing not empty land, but possibility. He pointed out where the bus lines ran, how foot traffic would flow, where people would naturally congregate. The architects took notes, adjusting plans in real time on their tablets. "The main entrance needs to be visible from the street," Daniel insisted. "Not hidden behind landscaping or artistic features. People need to know immediately where to go in an emergency." "But the design aesthetic," one architect began, "should say you're welcome here, not appreciate our architecture while you bleed," Daniel cut him off. Olivia hid a smile behind her hand. As they were leaving, a group of locals had gathered at the chain-link fence, watching the suits survey their neighborhood. Daniel recognized several faces: Mrs. Washington from the corner store, Jerome, who ran the barbershop, teenage kids who should have been in school. "What's going in here?" Mrs. Washington called out. "More condos we can't afford?" Olivia looked at Daniel. He understood the test immediately. He walked to the fence, removing his hard hat. "It's an emergency care center, Mrs. Washington. Free or sliding scale based on what you can afford. 24-hour pharmacy with medications at cost. No insurance required." The crowd's skepticism was palpable. "Yeah, right," someone scoffed. "Nothing's free in this neighborhood except trouble." "You're right," Daniel said. "Nothing's been free here. That's the point. This is different. My wife died because she couldn't afford care. My daughter nearly did too. The woman funding this," he gestured to Olivia, "almost died on an ER floor while people stepped over her. We're building something different because we know what it's like to be failed by the system." Jerome stepped forward. "You look familiar. You Danny Ross, Sarah's husband?" "Yes, sir." "I cut her hair," Jerome said quietly. "Sweet woman. Smart. Taught at Jefferson Elementary before." He trailed off. "This place is really for her?" "The Sarah Ross Memorial Emergency Care Center," Daniel confirmed. "She believed everyone deserved dignity and health care. We're going to try to provide it." The crowd began murmuring, the tone shifting from skepticism to cautious interest. Someone asked about jobs. Another about pediatric services. Within minutes, Daniel was fielding questions like he'd been doing this for years instead of days. Olivia watched from a distance, letting him handle it. When they finally returned to the car, she was quiet for a long moment. "You're a natural at this," she said finally. "They're my people. I speak their language." "It's more than that. You build bridges. Between worlds, between perspectives. That's a rare gift." Back at the office, the afternoon was consumed by meetings with medical directors, each presenting their vision for their departments. Daniel listened, took notes, and asked the questions no one else thought to ask. Why were psychiatric services in the basement where they felt hidden? Why was pediatric emergency separate from adult emergency when families often came in together? Why did the billing office have prime real estate while social services was tucked in a back corner? By 5 o'clock, his head was spinning with medical terminology, architectural specifications, and budget projections. James appeared at his elbow with coffee and a sympathetic smile. "Overwhelming? Like drinking from a fire hose. It gets easier. Also, you have a visitor." Daniel looked up to find Frank Martinez standing in the doorway, looking as out of place in the corporate office as Daniel had felt yesterday. His former foreman was wearing his cleanest work clothes, holding his beat-up baseball cap in his hands. "Frank? What are you doing here?" "Came to see if it was true." Danny Ross in a suit, working in a tower with the rich folks. Daniel stood, embracing his old boss. "It's true. Still can't believe it myself." Frank looked around the office, Daniel's office. He was still adjusting to that, taking in the view, the expensive furniture, the plans spread across every surface. "Construction?" Frank asked, examining the blueprints. "Healthcare facilities. Emergency centers for neighborhoods like ours." Frank studied the plans with his expert eye. "Good bones. But your concrete specs are wrong for Chicago weather. You need higher PSI for the freeze-thaw cycle. Would you be willing to consult on that?" The question came from Olivia, who'd appeared in the doorway. "We could use someone who understands local construction conditions." Frank straightened, clearly recognizing her from newspaper photos. "Miss Jennings." "Mr. Martinez, Daniel speaks highly of you, says you're the best concrete foreman in the city." "He exaggerates." "He doesn't," Daniel said. "Frank taught me everything about reading sites, understanding how buildings want to stand. Different from what I'm doing now, but not that different." After Frank left, with Olivia's business card and a consulting offer, Daniel found himself alone with Olivia again. "You can't hire everyone I know," he said. "Why not?" "You know good people. We need good people." She paused. "Speaking of which, there's something else we need to discuss. The community stakeholders meeting is next week. Local politicians, community leaders, activists. They're going to be skeptical, maybe hostile. They've been promised help before and been disappointed. You want me to lead it. I want you to be yourself. Tell them what you told me. Tell them about Sarah, about Maddie, about why this matters. Make them believe because you believe." Daniel thought about the crowd at the construction site, their deep skepticism born from decades of broken promises. What if they don't believe? What if they think this is just another corporation trying to gentrify their neighborhood? Then we prove them wrong. One patient at a time, one family at a time, one saved life at a time. That evening, Daniel picked up Maddie from after-school care, finding her building with blocks in a corner while other kids played around her. "What are you making, baby girl?" "A hospital," she said, not looking up. "But a good one. Where they help people even if they don't have money." Daniel knelt beside her. "What makes it good?" "It has a place for kids to play while their parents get better. And the walls are yellow because yellow is happy. And nobody has to wait outside because there's room for everyone." Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought for the third time this week. He made mental notes to suggest a children's area with toys and books, painted in warm colors, where siblings could wait safely while their families received care. That night, after Maddie's bath and bedtime story, Daniel found himself unable to sleep. He stood on his narrow balcony, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, when his phone buzzed with an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer. "Mr. Ross?" This is Channel 7 News. We're doing a story on Olivia Jennings' new healthcare initiative, and we understand you're playing a key role. Would you be available for an interview? Daniel's first instinct was to refuse, but then he thought about the skeptical faces at the fence that morning, the community that needed to hear this from someone they trusted. When? Tomorrow morning, if possible. We'd like to film at the construction site. After agreeing to the interview, Daniel called Olivia, expecting voicemail at this late hour. She answered on the first ring. Can't sleep either, she asked without preamble. Channel 7 wants to interview me tomorrow about the project. There was a pause. That's fast. Someone leaked our plans. Are you comfortable with that kind of exposure? Are you? It's not about me anymore, Daniel. You're the face of this project to the community. What you say tomorrow will either build trust or destroy it before we even break ground. No pressure, Daniel thought. He could hear exhaustion in her voice, the weight of fighting her own board, her own family legacy, the entire healthcare system. Why are you really doing this, Olivia? It can't just be about that night in the ER. The silence stretched so long he thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My mother died when I was 8. Ovarian cancer. We had the best doctors, the best hospitals, experimental treatments that cost millions. But I watched her fade away in a private room that felt like a luxury prison. The day before she died, a cleaning lady came in. Maria was her name. She sat with my mother for an hour, held her hand, sang to her in Spanish. My mother didn't speak Spanish, but she smiled for the first time in weeks. She paused, and Daniel could hear her taking a steadying breath. Later, I learned Maria's own daughter was dying in the county hospital. She couldn't afford treatment, couldn't even afford to take time off to be with her. But she sat with my mother, a stranger, because she said no one should die without comfort. Maria's daughter died 3 days after my mother. She was 12. The weight of the story settled between them across the phone line. I've spent 18 years trying to understand how we can live in a world where that happens, Olivia continued. Where money determines not just quality of care, but whether you get care at all. Where Maria could comfort my mother, but couldn't save her own daughter. This project, it's not about that night in the ER. It's about every night, every Maria, every daughter who doesn't have to die. They talked until nearly dawn, not about business, but about loss, about the strange fellowship of grief, about the audacity of hoping to change systems that seemed carved in stone. When Daniel finally hung up, he felt something shift in his understanding of Olivia Jennings. She wasn't a rich woman playing at charity. She was a wounded healer trying to fix a system that had failed people on both sides of the economic divide. The next morning came too quickly. Daniel dressed carefully, choosing his old work clothes instead of the new suit. If he was going to speak to his community, he needed to look like himself, not like someone trying to be something he wasn't. The news crew was already set up at the construction site when he arrived. The reporter, a polished woman named Patricia Kim, walked him through the questions while the camera operator adjusted lighting. Just be natural, she advised. Speak from the heart. Natural. Right. Nothing more natural than being interviewed on television about a project that could either transform healthcare or crash spectacularly. Mr. Ross, Patricia began once the cameras were rolling, you were a construction worker just days ago. Now you're helping design revolutionary healthcare facilities. How did that happen? Daniel looked directly at the camera, imagining he was talking to his neighbors, to Mrs. Washington and Jerome, and all the skeptics who had every right to their skepticism. My daughter was having an asthma attack. We waited 3 hours in an ER while she struggled to breathe. A woman came in, dying, and everyone ignored her because she looked like she couldn't pay. I gave her our spot. He paused, letting the words sink in. That woman turned out to be Olivia Jennings. But I didn't know that. I just knew she was dying and nobody cared. That's what's wrong with our healthcare system. We've forgotten that every person who walks through those doors is someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's hope. And now you're working with Miss Jennings to change that? My wife died 3 years ago because she couldn't afford treatment for a heart condition. She died in our bed while our 6-year-old daughter slept beside her. That's not a healthcare system. That's a tragedy we've normalized. This facility, he gestured to the empty lot, will be named after her. The Sarah Ross Memorial Emergency Care Center. It will serve everyone, regardless of ability to pay, because healthcare is a human right, not a luxury. Patricia asked more questions about the specifics of the facility, but Daniel kept returning to the human element. He talked about phone chargers and translation services, about hiring from the community, about dignity in crisis. He spoke about Maddie's yellow hospital in her block construction, about rooms for everyone. As the interview wrapped up, a small crowd had gathered again at the fence. This time, Daniel recognized more faces: parents from Maddie's school, neighbors from his building, workers from the nearby factories getting off night shift. "Is it real?" someone called out. "Or just another promise?" Daniel walked to the fence. "Mr. Torres, you remember when your son broke his arm last year? How long did you wait in the ER?" 6 hours, the man replied. "And they still sent me a bill for $3,000 I couldn't pay." That ends here. 6 months from now, this place will be open. Your son would be seen within an hour, and the most you'd pay is what you can afford. That's not a promise. That's a plan with funding, blueprints, and people who've been where you are making the decisions. An elderly woman pushed through the crowd. Daniel recognized her as Mrs. Chen from 2 buildings over, whose husband had diabetes. They said there would be a pharmacy. 24 hours, Mrs. Chen, insulin at cost, no insurance required. She began to cry, and Daniel felt the weight of what they were promising. These weren't abstract concepts or corporate initiatives. These were lives hanging in the balance, people who'd been failed so many times that hope itself felt dangerous. After the crowd dispersed, Patricia Kim approached him again, camera off. "That was powerful," she said, "but you know there's going to be pushback. The insurance companies, the for-profit hospitals, they won't like this model. If it succeeds, it threatens their entire business structure." "Good," Daniel said simply. Back at the office, the interview was already being discussed. Board members had seen the morning news, and reactions were mixed. Blackwood was furious about Daniel presenting the project without approved talking points. Dr. Winters was thrilled with the community engagement. Olivia was nowhere to be found. James appeared with his tablet and a worried expression. "She's in a board meeting." Emergency session. Some members are concerned about the public attention. Daniel found himself pacing his office, feeling helpless. He could handle construction sites and community skepticism, but corporate politics was entirely foreign territory. His phone rang. "Dr. Harrison from Chicago Memorial. Saw your interview. You did good, Ross, real good. But I'm calling about something else. Maddie's appointment tomorrow. Dr. Reyes wants to do a complete workup. Lung function, allergen testing, the works. It's going to take most of the day. Can you manage that?" "I'll make it work." "Good. And Ross? That line about healthcare being a human right? That's going on a plaque in our emergency department. With your permission, of course." The day crawled by with Daniel trying to focus on facility plans while anxiously waiting for news from the board meeting. At 3 o'clock, his office door opened and Olivia walked in. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect composure cracked around the edges. "They want to pull the plug," she said without preamble. "The board thinks we're moving too fast, that the public attention will create expectations we can't meet. Blackwood has the votes to shut us down." Daniel felt the floor drop out from under him, all those promises to his community, to Mrs. Chen and Mr. Torres, about to become just another broken dream. "Unless," Olivia continued, "we can prove community buy-in. The stakeholders meeting next week. If we can show overwhelming community support, documented and verified, the board will continue funding. If not..." She didn't need to finish. "What do you need me to do?" The impossible. Unite a community that's been divided and disappointed for decades. Get them to trust that this time is different. Get them to show up and speak up for something they've been taught not to expect. Daniel thought about the faces at the fence, the hope and skepticism warring in their eyes. "I'll need help. People from the community who others trust. Anyone you need. And I'll need to tell them the truth. All of it, including that this might fail." Olivia nodded. "Honesty is all we have left to offer." That evening, instead of going straight home, Daniel stopped at Jerome's barbershop. The place was busy, filled with the after-work crowd, conversations flowing as freely as the hair falling to the floor. "Danny Ross," Jerome called out. Saw you on TV this morning, looking like a natural. I need your help, Jerome. The barbershop quieted, everyone sensing the seriousness in Daniel's tone. He explained the situation, the board's skepticism, the need for community support. You're asking us to stick our necks out for another corporate promise, someone asked from the waiting area. No, Daniel said. I'm asking you to fight for something we deserve. Something Sarah deserved, something your kids deserve. I'm not promising it will work. I'm promising I'll fight for it until my last breath, and I'm asking you to fight with me. Jerome set down his clippers. What do you need? Spread the word. The stakeholders meeting is Tuesday night, 7 o'clock, at Jefferson Elementary. We need the room packed. We need stories, testimonies, proof that this community needs and wants this facility. And if your board still says no, then at least we fought. At least we didn't let them dismiss us without hearing our voices. Over the next 3 days, Daniel barely slept. He spent his days in meetings with architects and medical directors, refining plans and fighting for every community-focused detail. He spent his evenings going door to door in the neighborhood with Maddie in tow, talking to families about the stakeholders meeting. Maddie became his secret weapon. Children have a way of disarming adults, and her genuine enthusiasm for the good hospital her daddy was building opened doors that might have remained closed. My mommy went to heaven because the hospital was too expensive, she told Mrs. Rodriguez, whose son had severe asthma. But daddy's making sure that doesn't happen to other mommies. Mrs. Rodriguez promised to bring her entire extended family to the meeting. Thursday was Maddie's appointment with Dr. Reyes, and Daniel had to put the project aside to focus on his daughter. The pediatric pulmonologist was thorough, running test after test while Maddie charmed the entire medical staff with her commentary. This machine sounds like Darth Vader, she announced during the lung function test, making the technician laugh so hard she had to restart the measurement. Dr. Reyes' conclusions were both reassuring and sobering. Her asthma is manageable with proper medication and monitoring. The good news is, with consistent treatment, she should be able to live a completely normal life. The bad news is, any lapse in that treatment could trigger severe attacks. I understand, Daniel said, holding Maddie's hand. I've heard about your work with Miss Jennings, Dr. Reyes added. The 24-hour pharmacy concept is brilliant. Do you know how many of my patients can't fill their prescriptions because pharmacies close before they get off work? Too many, Daniel replied. That evening, as he tucked Maddie into bed, she asked, Daddy, are you scared? About what, baby girl? The meeting. Aunt Carmen said you're trying to change the world, and that's scary. Daniel sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. Remember when you learned to ride your bike? You were scared, but you did it anyway. That's called courage. Doing something important even when it scares you. So you are scared. Terrified, he admitted. But it's worth being scared for. You're worth being scared for. She hugged Mr. Peanuts tighter. Mommy would be proud of you. I hope so, baby girl. I really hope so. Saturday brought an unexpected visitor to his apartment, Harrison Blackwood himself, looking deeply uncomfortable in the narrow hallway of Daniel's building. Mr. Ross, we need to talk. Daniel let him in, noting how the CFO's eyes cataloged every detail of the modest apartment, the secondhand furniture, the water stain on the ceiling, Maddie's artwork covering the refrigerator. This is how you live? Blackwood's tone was unreadable. This is how most of America lives, Mr. Blackwood. The CFO moved to the window, looking out at the street below where kids played in the spray of an open fire hydrant despite the October chill. I grew up in a place like this, Blackwood said quietly. Detroit, 8 Mile area. My mother cleaned offices at night. My father worked the assembly line at Ford until his back gave out. He turned from the window. I spent 40 years climbing out of poverty, and I swore I'd never look back. But you're looking back now. Your interview. What you said about healthcare being a human right. My mother died of complications from diabetes she couldn't afford to treat properly. I was already making 6 figures at that point, but she was too proud to ask for help. Daniel remained silent, sensing this was a confession that needed space. I've been fighting this project because I've been taught that profitable and charitable are mutually exclusive. But your model... Blackwood pulled out a tablet, showing spreadsheets covered in calculations. If we can achieve 60% capacity in the first year, the facility breaks even. If the preventive care reduces ER readmissions by just 20%, we're profitable by year 3. So you're supporting the project now. I'm saying if you can fill that room Tuesday night, if you can prove the community will actually use these facilities, then yes, the numbers work, but only if the human element works first. After Blackwood left, Daniel sat in his kitchen, staring at the man's forgotten pen on the table, a Mont Blanc that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly groceries. The CFO of a major healthcare company had sat in his kitchen and admitted his mother died of the same systemic failures that killed Sarah. The world was revealing itself to be more complicated than Daniel had imagined. Sunday was spent in final preparation. Olivia arrived at his apartment with a team of assistants, transforming his living room into a makeshift command center. They reviewed every possible question, every potential objection, every story that needed to be told. "You're the primary speaker," Olivia explained. "I'll present the technical details, but you're the voice of the community. You're the bridge between their skepticism and our solution." "No pressure," Daniel muttered. Maddie wandered in, dragging Mr. Peanuts, and climbed onto Olivia's lap without hesitation. The billionaire CEO froze, clearly unaccustomed to children treating her like furniture. "You smell nice," Maddie announced, "like the fancy soap at the doctor's office." "Thank you," Olivia replied, looking to Daniel for help. "She means it as a compliment. Maddie, let Ms. Jennings work." "She's fine," Olivia said, surprising everyone, including herself. She adjusted Maddie on her lap and continued reviewing documents while the little girl played with her phone, taking selfies with increasingly ridiculous filters. Carmen arrived with dinner. Nothing fancy, just her famous arroz con pollo that could feed an army. She surveyed the scene with raised eyebrows. "The billionaire is in our living room," she whispered to Daniel in the kitchen. "The billionaire is scared of a 6-year-old, Daniel whispered back, watching Olivia awkwardly try to respond to Maddie's constant stream of questions. She's human, after all. Monday came with a storm, rain lashing the city with unusual violence for October. Daniel worried people wouldn't come to the meeting in this weather, but his phone was buzzing with confirmations. Jerome had mobilized the barbershop network. Mrs. Chen had rallied the senior center. Maria from Maddie's school had organized the parents. That evening, he found himself standing in his bathroom, staring at his reflection. The man looking back wasn't the construction worker he'd been a week ago, but he wasn't the corporate executive he was pretending to be either. He was something in between, something new, a translator between worlds that rarely spoke to each other. His phone rang. Sarah's mother, Helen, calling from Florida, where she'd moved after Sarah's death, unable to bear the city that had taken her daughter. "Daniel, I saw your interview online. Is this real? A medical center in Sarah's name?" "It's real, Helen. Or it will be if tomorrow goes well." "She would be so proud," Helen's voice broke. "She always said you were meant for something special. She saw it when nobody else did. I'm trying to live up to what she saw." "You already have, honey. Just by trying, you already have." Tuesday arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that October sometimes offered as apology for its earlier storms. Daniel spent the day at the office, unable to focus on anything except the coming evening. At 3 o'clock, Olivia found him pacing his office. "You'll wear a hole in that expensive carpet," she said. "It's not the speaking that scares me. It's the hope. I'm asking them to hope again after so many disappointments." "Then don't ask them to hope. Ask them to fight. Hope is passive. Fighting is active. Give them something to do, not just something to wait for." At 5:30, Daniel headed to Jefferson Elementary, the school where Sarah had taught, where her memorial plaque still hung in the hallway. The cafeteria had been transformed for the meeting, chairs arranged in rows, a projection screen set up for the presentation. By 6:30, people were arriving. First a trickle, then a stream, then a flood. The cafeteria filled, then overflowed into the hallway. Someone opened the gymnasium, and still people came. Mrs. Washington from the corner store. Mr. Torres with his son, whose arm had healed crooked because they couldn't afford proper follow-up care. Families Daniel had never met, but who'd heard about the meeting through the neighborhood network. Patricia Kim was there with her news crew, but also reporters from 3 other stations, 2 newspapers, and several online outlets. The story had grown beyond a local interest piece. At exactly 7 o'clock, Daniel stood before the crowd, his heart pounding so hard he was sure the microphone would pick it up. The room fell silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on him, waiting. "My name is Daniel Ross," he began, his voice steadier than he'd expected. "3 years ago, my wife Sarah died in our bed because we couldn't afford treatment for her heart condition. She was 29 years old. She taught 3rd grade in this building. Some of your children probably remember Mrs. Ross." He saw nods, tears, recognition. "Last week, my daughter Maddie and I spent 3 hours in an emergency room while she struggled to breathe through an asthma attack. We waited because that's what people like us do. We wait. We wait while our children suffer. We wait while our parents decline. We wait while treatable conditions become terminal because waiting is all we can afford." The room was so quiet he could hear the fluorescent lights humming. But last week, something else happened. I gave up our spot to a stranger who was dying on the waiting room floor. That stranger turned out to be Olivia Jennings, and she offered me a chance to make sure no one else has to wait to live. He clicked to the first slide, showing the architectural rendering of the Sarah Ross Memorial Emergency Care Center. This is not a promise. This is not a maybe. This is a fully funded, ready-to-build facility that will serve this community regardless of ability to pay. But here's the truth. The board of Jennings Medical Group thinks you won't come. They think you're too skeptical, too beaten down, too used to disappointment to believe in something better. They think this room would be empty tonight. He looked around the packed space, people standing along the walls, crowding in the doorways. Prove them wrong. What followed was 2 hours of testimony that would later be described by reporters as one of the most powerful displays of community voice in Chicago's history. One by one, people stood and told their stories. Mrs. Chen talked about rationing her husband's insulin, cutting pills in half to make them last longer, watching him slowly deteriorate because full doses were a luxury they couldn't afford. Mr. Torres showed pictures of his son's crooked arm, the permanent reminder of their inability to pay for proper orthopedic care. A teenage girl named Destiny spoke about her mother's death from cervical cancer that could have been prevented with regular screenings they couldn't afford. Jerome talked about cutting hair for 40 years, about all the stories he'd heard in his chair, the people who suffered in silence because seeking help meant bankruptcy. Through it all, Olivia sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face, making no effort to hide them. Blackwood was there too, his expression shifting from skeptical to stunned to something that looked like shame. Dr. Winters from Chicago Memorial stood up. "I've been an ER doctor for 20 years, and I've sent people home to die because they couldn't pay. I've made those decisions. I've been part of this system. What Mr. Ross and Ms. Jennings are proposing isn't just needed. It's revolutionary. And revolutions require courage from all of us." When the last story was told, Daniel stood again. "The board wants proof of community buy-in. I think we've given them that. But they also need to know this isn't just about one facility. This is about changing how healthcare works in America. It starts here, in this neighborhood, with these stories. But it doesn't end here. If we succeed, this model gets replicated. Other communities get their own facilities. The system changes, one emergency room at a time." He paused, looking at Olivia, who nodded. "Miss Jennings would like to address you now." Olivia stood, and Daniel saw her transform from the vulnerable woman who'd cried at their stories to the CEO who commanded boardrooms. "I've been rich my entire life," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I've never wondered if I could afford medication or treatment or care. Until last week, when I was dying on an ER floor and everyone assumed I was worthless because I looked like I couldn't pay. Daniel Ross saved my life. Not because of who I am, but despite who everyone thought I was. That's the kind of care everyone deserves." Olivia's words hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. She pulled out her phone, holding it up for everyone to see, and made a call on speaker. The room held its collective breath as the phone rang once, twice, then a familiar voice answered. "Harrison, you're on speaker with about 500 community members at Jefferson Elementary. They've just spent 2 hours telling us exactly why the Sarah Ross Memorial Emergency Care Center needs to exist. What's the board's decision?" Blackwood's voice was different than Daniel had ever heard it, stripped of its usual corporate armor. We were watching the live feed. The entire board. Ms. Jennings, the vote was unanimous. Full funding approved, groundbreaking in 2 weeks. The room exploded. People were crying, hugging, shouting. Mrs. Chen collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. Jerome was pumping his fist in the air. Teenagers were filming everything on their phones, already posting to social media. Daniel found himself surrounded by neighbors, shaking his hand, patting his back, thanking him for something that hadn't even been built yet. Through the chaos, he saw Maddie pushing through the crowd, Carmen helping her navigate the sea of adults. His daughter launched herself into his arms, and he held her tight, feeling the weight of what they'd just accomplished settling over him like a blanket. "Did we do it, Daddy? Did we save the hospital?" "We started it, baby girl. We started something big." Patricia Kim appeared with her microphone, camera operator in tow. "Mr. Ross, how does it feel to have changed the course of healthcare in your community?" Before he could answer, Olivia was beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "We haven't changed anything yet. We've just gotten permission to try. The real work starts now." The celebration continued for another hour, but Daniel noticed Olivia slip away. He found her outside, standing in the playground where Sarah used to bring her students for recess, staring at the empty swings moving slightly in the breeze. "You okay?" he asked. "My father built his empire on the principle that healthcare was a business, not a service. He'd be appalled by what we just did." She turned to him, and in the dim light from the school windows, he could see tears on her cheeks again. "I've never been prouder of anything in my life." "Sarah would have liked you," Daniel said without thinking, then wondered why he'd said it. Olivia smiled. "I would have liked her too, a teacher who saw potential in everyone, who fought for kids who had no one else fighting for them. You married well, Daniel Ross." "I did." They stood in comfortable silence until Carmen appeared, Maddie asleep in her arms. "Someone crashed hard after all the excitement. I'll take her home." "I should go," Daniel started. "No," Carmen interrupted. "You should finish this. Whatever else needs to happen tonight, finish it. I've got Maddie." As his sister left with his daughter, Daniel realized the crowd was dispersing, but several key people remained. Blackwood was deep in conversation with Jerome and several other community leaders. Dr. Winters was taking contact information from people interested in working at the new facility. James, Daniel's assistant, was somehow everywhere at once, coordinating follow-ups and gathering testimonies. "We need to talk logistics," Olivia said, her CEO persona sliding back into place. "Construction crew, medical staff, community liaisons. We have 2 weeks to get everything in place for groundbreaking." They worked until midnight in that elementary school cafeteria, surrounded by children's artwork and motivational posters, planning a revolution in healthcare delivery. Blackwood had his laptop out, running real-time cost analyses. Dr. Winters was on the phone with colleagues at other hospitals, recruiting staff. Community members volunteered for various committees, turning what could have been corporate planning into grassroots organizing. "I want local hiring for construction," Daniel insisted. "Frank Martinez as concrete foreman, local contractors whenever possible." "That'll cost more," Blackwood warned. "It'll buy community investment. Every person who helps build this place becomes an advocate for its success." "He's right," Olivia said. "This isn't just about providing health care. It's about economic revitalization, jobs, training, opportunity." By the time they finally left the school, plans were in motion that would have typically taken months of corporate meetings to approve. The urgency of the community's need had cut through red tape like a scalpel. Daniel walked to his truck, exhausted but energized, and found Olivia leaning against it. "No town car tonight?" he asked. "I sent Margaret home. Figured I'd get a ride with you, if that's okay. See the neighborhood at night. Understand the transportation challenges people face getting to emergency care." The drive through the dark streets was quiet at first, Olivia observing the shuttered stores, the broken streetlights, the general infrastructure decay that made even simple things like getting to a hospital complicated. "There," Daniel pointed to a corner. "That's where people wait for the bus to Chicago Memorial. No shelter, no bench, no light. In winter, people literally freeze waiting for transportation to the ER." "We'll run shuttles," Olivia said immediately. Free shuttles from major transit points. That's not in the budget Blackwood approved. Then I'll fund it personally. Daniel glanced at her, this woman who'd gone from dying on an ER floor to revolutionizing healthcare in less than 2 weeks. Why does this matter so much to you? Really? Because I've been useless my entire life, she said simply. Oh, I've run companies and made money and attended charity galas, but I've never actually mattered. That night on the ER floor, I realized I could die, and the only thing that would change is some numbers in various portfolios. You gave me a chance to matter. They pulled up to Daniel's building, but neither moved to get out of the truck. I should tell you something, Olivia said. The board approved the funding, but they also set conditions. The facility has to be operational in 6 months, not the year we originally planned. It has to achieve break-even within 18 months instead of 3 years. And if it fails, if we can't make the model work, they'll convert it to a traditional for-profit urgent care center. Daniel felt his jaw clench. So, tonight's victory was conditional. Everything in business is conditional, but Daniel, we're going to make this work. We have to. The next morning came too early, Maddie bouncing on his bed at 6 a.m., excited about telling everyone at school about the previous night's meeting. Daniel made her breakfast, packed her lunch, and walked her to school, noting how many people nodded at him with recognition now. He'd become something he'd never wanted to be, a public figure. At the office, controlled chaos reigned. The media coverage from the stakeholder meeting had gone viral, with the headline, "Construction Worker Revolutionizes Healthcare," trending on social media. Olivia's assistant fielded calls from reporters, other healthcare organizations, even international media interested in the story. We need to stay focused, Olivia said during the morning meeting. Media attention is nice, but it doesn't build facilities or treat patients. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a symphony of planning, organizing, and problem-solving. Daniel split his time between the office and the community, translating between corporate speak and neighborhood reality. He reviewed architectural plans with Frank Martinez, who'd agreed to be construction foreman, ensuring every decision made sense for the environment it would serve. You're going to want reinforced glass on the ground floor windows, Frank advised, studying the blueprints. This neighborhood, things happen. Better to plan for it than pretend it won't. That sounds like we're building a fortress, not a medical facility, one architect protested. You build for the reality, not the ideal, Daniel said, but make it reinforced glass with that coating that makes it look normal. Security without making people feel like they're entering a prison. 3 days before groundbreaking, disaster struck. Daniel arrived at the office to find Olivia in crisis mode, her usually calm demeanor shattered. 3 board members are threatening to pull support, she said without preamble. They've been getting pressure from other healthcare corporations. If this model succeeds, it threatens billions in profits industry-wide. What do? We need something they can't ignore. Public pressure so intense that backing out would be worse for their reputations than going forward. Daniel thought about the community members who'd shared their stories, the trust they'd placed in this project. Give me 24 hours. He spent that day and night mobilizing everyone he knew. Jerome turned his barbershop into a phone bank, calling local politicians. Mrs. Chen organized the senior center to write letters to board members. Maria coordinated parents to flood social media with their healthcare horror stories. Maddie's teacher had her entire class draw pictures of what the new medical center would mean to them, which Carmen helped scan and email to every board member. But the masterstroke came from an unexpected source. Dr. Matit. Harrison from Chicago Memorial called Daniel that evening. I've been talking to my colleagues at other hospitals. We want to help. Check your email. Daniel opened his laptop to find a letter signed by over 200 doctors and nurses from across Chicago, endorsing the project and pledging to volunteer hours at the facility. The letter concluded with a powerful statement. Healthcare is not a privilege to be rationed, but a right to be guaranteed. The Sarah Ross Memorial Emergency Care Center represents the future we've been too cowardly to build. We stand with Daniel Ross and Olivia Jennings in making that future reality. The letter was leaked to the media within hours. Whether by design or accident, Daniel never found out. By morning, it was the lead story on every local news outlet. The 3 dissenting board members withdrew their objections, unwilling to be seen opposing both the community and the medical establishment. Groundbreaking day arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made Chicago feel blessed. The empty lot had been transformed with tents, chairs, a small stage with a podium. Media trucks lined the street. Community members arrived in their best clothes, treating this like the historic occasion it was. Daniel stood with Maddie, who wore the new dress Olivia had mysteriously sent over the night before. "Just something I saw and thought she'd like," the card had said, but Daniel recognized the gesture for what it was. Olivia ensuring Maddie felt special on this day named for her mother. "Do you think Mommy can see this?" Maddie asked, adjusting Mr. Peanut's bow tie she'd insisted he needed for the occasion. "I think she knows, baby girl." Somehow, she knows. The ceremony began with unexpected dignity. The mayor spoke, having suddenly discovered the political value of associating with the project. Board members who'd opposed the project just days ago now smiled for cameras as if it had been their idea. Daniel found the hypocrisy amusing rather than angering. Politics was politics, but the building would be real. When Olivia took the podium, she commanded attention not through volume but through presence. "6 months from today," she began, "this ground we're breaking will support a building that breaks the rules of American healthcare. It will say that your worth is not determined by your wealth. It will say that healing is a right, not a commodity. It will say that Daniel Ross was right to give up his daughter's spot in an ER for a stranger because every life has equal value." She called Daniel to the stage, and he approached with Maddie's hand in his, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on them. "Mr. Ross, would you like to say something?" Daniel looked out at the crowd, his neighbors, his community, the reporters, the board members who still didn't quite trust this experiment. Then he looked at the golden shovel they'd provided for the ceremonial groundbreaking, pristine and purely symbolic. "Frank," he called out, "you got that real shovel?" Frank Martinez emerged from the crowd with a worn, practical shovel, the kind that actually moved earth rather than just posed for pictures. The crowd laughed, understanding the statement. Daniel handed the golden shovel to Maddie. "This one's for the pictures," he said into the microphone. Then he took Frank's shovel. "This one's for the work." He drove the blade into the earth with the practiced motion of someone who'd broken ground before, but never for something that mattered this much. The chunk of earth he lifted wasn't ceremonial. It was real, substantial, the actual beginning of construction. "Sarah Ross was a teacher," he said, his voice carrying across the lot. "She believed in building things that last, not just buildings, but futures. This medical center is her lesson plan for all of us, that we can choose compassion over profit, humanity over policy, life over ledgers. Today we break ground. Tomorrow we pour foundation. In 6 months we open doors. But the real construction started the night a stranger helped another stranger in an ER, proving that kindness is the most powerful force in healthcare." The crowd erupted in applause. Olivia took the real shovel from Daniel and drove it into the ground herself, her designer suit be damned. Then Frank took a turn, then Dr. Winters, then Jerome, then Mrs. Chen. The golden shovel sat forgotten as person after person took turns with the real one, each claiming ownership of this project through the simple act of moving earth. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the media packed up, Daniel found himself alone at the edge of the lot with Olivia. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the disturbed earth that would become Sarah's legacy. 6 months, Olivia said. "Think we can do it? We just got 500 people to show up for healthcare reform. We got doctors to volunteer their time. We got a corporate board to approve a project that threatens their entire business model." Daniel turned to her. 6 months feels easy compared to what we've already done." That evening, Daniel tucked Maddie into bed with extra care, knowing that her life was about to change in ways neither of them could fully predict. The construction would mean long hours away from her, but it also meant building a world where she'd never have to choose between breathing and eating. "Daddy," she said sleepily, "when the hospital is built, will you still be important?" "I was never important, baby girl. The work is important. The people we're helping are important. But you started it. You gave up our spot. And look what grew from that. One small act, and now hundreds of people are involved. That's how change happens. Not from one important person, but from lots of regular people deciding something matters. After she fell asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with the construction timeline Frank had drafted. 6 months to build what usually took a year. It would require 16-hour days, perfect coordination, and no major setbacks. It was impossible, and yet he knew they'd do it because failure meant betraying everyone who'd stood with a shovel today. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Thank you for making me brave enough to do this." He typed back, "Thank you for making it possible." Another text appeared. "The board wants daily progress reports. They're looking for any excuse to default to traditional operations. We can't give them one." "We won't." 3 dots appeared, suggesting she was typing, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "I've never had a partner before. In anything. It's terrifying and wonderful." Daniel stared at the word partner, feeling its weight. They were partners now, the construction worker and the CEO, bound together by a shared vision of what healthcare could be. It should have felt impossible, but after everything that had happened, it felt inevitable. The next morning, construction began in earnest. Daniel arrived at 5 a.m. to find Frank already there with a crew of local workers, many of whom Daniel recognized from the neighborhood. They'd hired anyone who could work, former factory workers, returning veterans, young people who'd never had a chance at a real career. "You know, this is more than just construction," Frank said, watching his crew prepare equipment. "These people, they're building their own hospital. Every brick they lay is for their families." And that became the spirit of the construction, not just a job, but a mission. When they hit inevitable problems, the crew worked through them with determination that couldn't be taught or bought. When the foundation inspection revealed soil issues requiring additional reinforcement, they worked around the clock to stay on schedule. When supply chain problems delayed critical materials, they reorganized the entire construction sequence to keep moving forward. Daniel split his days between the construction site and the office, translating between the two worlds he now straddled. In the morning, he'd review architectural modifications with Frank, ensuring every practical detail was addressed. In the afternoon, he'd sit in board meetings, fighting for budget allocations and defending community-focused decisions. "Why do we need a children's play area in an emergency room?" Blackwood asked during one particularly tense meeting. "Because single parents can't leave their other kids at home when one needs emergency care," Daniel replied with practiced patience. "So siblings sit in waiting rooms for hours, scared and bored, sometimes getting into trouble that creates more problems for staff. A play area isn't a luxury, it's operational efficiency." Olivia backed him every time. Her authority, the shield that protected his unconventional ideas from corporate resistance. But Daniel could see the toll it was taking on her. She'd lost weight, her designer clothes hanging looser each week. Dark circles appeared under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "You need to rest," he told her one evening as they reviewed staffing proposals. "I'll rest when we open," she replied, not looking up from her laptop. "That's what Sarah used to say. She'd work herself to exhaustion for her students, say she'd rest during summer break, except she never made it to summer break." Olivia's hands stilled on the keyboard. She looked at him with those green eyes that had first caught his attention on the ER floor. "I'm not going to die, Daniel." Neither was she. They stared at each other across the conference table, two people bound by loss and purpose, trying to build something that mattered while fighting their own demons. "I don't know how to stop," Olivia admitted quietly. If I slow down, I might realize how crazy this all is. How unlikely. How impossible." "Then don't stop. But eat something. Sleep occasionally. Take Maddie's advice and count your breaths when things get scary." She smiled, the expression transforming her face from corporate warrior to the vulnerable woman he'd saved. "Your daughter is wise beyond her years." She's had to be. 3 months into construction, they faced their biggest crisis yet. A competing healthcare corporation filed an injunction claiming the facility violated various regulations and zoning requirements. The construction had to stop while lawyers battled, each day of delay eating into their impossible timeline. Daniel stood at the construction site, watching his crew sit idle, being paid to do nothing while lawyers argued about paperwork. Frank stood beside him, chewing tobacco and radiating frustration. This is bullshit, Danny. Pure harassment. I know. The crew's getting restless. They need to work, not just for the money, but for the pride of it. Daniel's phone rang. Olivia, her voice tight with controlled anger. Emergency board meeting. They're considering pulling the plug, converting what we've built so far into a traditional facility. When? Now. Can you get here? Daniel looked at his idle crew, at the half-built structure that represented so many hopes, and made a decision. Frank, get everyone together. We're going to that board meeting. Danny, I don't think construction workers are welcome in corporate. They're going to decide the fate of a building we're building for a community we're from. We're not asking for welcome. We're demanding witness. An hour later, 30 construction workers in hard hats and work boots filled the executive conference room at Jennings Medical Group. Board members stared in shock as Daniel's crew lined the walls, their presence a silent reminder of what was at stake. This is highly irregular, Blackwood protested. So is killing a project because a competitor filed false claims, Daniel responded. These men and women have been building Sarah's legacy with their hands. They deserve to be here when you decide whether their work matters. Olivia stood at the head of the table, and Daniel saw her draw strength from the presence of the workers. The injunction is baseless and will be thrown out, she said. But every day we delay costs us not just money, but credibility with the community. I'm proposing we continue construction under a provisional permit while the legal matters are resolved. That's risky, a board member said. If the injunction is upheld, we'd have to tear down anything built under provisional permits. Then we'd better make sure it's not upheld, Olivia replied. She turned to address the room, but her eyes found Daniel's. This project isn't just about healthcare. It's about proving that corporations can choose community over competition, that profit and purpose can coexist. If we fold now, we're admitting that the old way is the only way. Jerome stepped forward from among the construction crew. May I say something? The board looked to Olivia, who nodded. I'm a barber, Jerome said simply. Been cutting hair in that neighborhood for 40 years. I've heard every story, every struggle, every small victory. When Danny here said we were building a hospital that would treat us like humans, I didn't believe it. When Miss Jennings put her money behind it, I started to hope. Now you want to quit because some other rich folks don't like competition? That's exactly the kind of decision that made us stop trusting you in the first place. The room was silent. Then Mrs. Chen, who'd somehow appeared among the construction crew despite being 75 years old, spoke up. My husband is diabetic. Every month, we choose between his insulin and our rent. Every month, we pray nothing else goes wrong because one emergency would destroy us. This hospital means we might live to see our grandchildren graduate. You're not just deciding about a building, you're deciding about our lives. One by one, other workers spoke. Not eloquently, not with prepared statements, but with raw honesty about what this project meant. By the end, several board members were visibly emotional. The vote was closer than it should have been, 8-6, but provisional construction was approved. As the workers filed out, victorious but exhausted, Blackwood approached Daniel. That was either brilliant or manipulative, the CFO said. It was necessary, Daniel replied. You needed to see the faces behind the numbers. I saw my mother's face, Blackwood admitted quietly. In Mrs. Chen, in all of them. I saw my mother.